So everyone is here. OG, OO, CG, CO. Everyone's complete. All right. So hi everyone. Good afternoon. So welcome to the semifinal round of NUDC 2025. Big congratulations for everyone who made it this far. So in OG, today we have Udayana. In OO, we have Gadjah Mada. In CG, we have Diponegoro. And on CO, we have Airlangga. Several reminder before we proceed. Number one, please use the timer provided by the committee. Second, please maintain respect to everyone in the room. And lastly, for observer, I know that this is going to be a very exciting round for everyone to observe, but please also maintain decorum. Please do not enter and leave the room while the debate is running. And yeah, I think I'll introduce the panel of educators that will be judging for today's round. My name is Jessica and I'm from UI. Alongside with me, there are...
Hello, my name is Angelique. I'm from Unpar. Good luck, everyone.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel from BISNIS. All the best.
Hi, I'm Marvel representing ONPAD. Best of luck.
Hello everyone, my name is Marcel from Tanjung Pura University. Good luck.
Hi everyone, my name is Joseph from Universitas Telkom. Good luck.
Hi everyone, my name is Marvin from ITB. Good luck.
All right, so without any further ado, we call upon the Prime Minister to open the debate. Yes, be quick and everyone please do so now as well. Anyone wants to go? Okay, I think we can start. PM, time is yours.
For the
purposes of this debate, we will assume that the being that gives humanity Babel is benevolent. It is completely separate from the happenings of the mundane world, the human world that we live in. So we assume there is no ill will. We assume that everything is done out of benevolence and out of understanding for humanity. We think that what is unique to Babel is that this is different from any known language, and that this has a very simplistic grammar, very simplistic verbal structure, very simplistic every structure that makes language inherently known to mankind, such as psychoanalysis. It is essentially very, very easy to understand, very easy to communicate, so that people across the world, even in the vast, dark Amazonian jungles, will be familiar with this language instantly. It is very understandable, translatable, and even people with diseases or people who are incapacitated can very, very easily understand this language. So I think that it will result in a quite equitable opportunity for everyone. It will also be inoffensive to many people. It is compatible with their worldview, with their religions, with their customs and cultures and common expressions, and that it will result in a minimal number of negative words or curses, etc., that results in unpleasantness. And I think that at the end of the day, this will result is a unique bridge between cultures and shifting the understanding of customs and etc. in the world to be a better version of language for humanity. What does humans use language for? I think that there are two reasons why language are created and used throughout human communities. The first is as an expression to communicate, to connect with each other, to understand, to bridge the communications between one community to the next, so that everyone knows what we are planning to do, what the basis of our community is going to do, and also integration between anyone in the world. So how will Babel impact this in the first purpose? We think that it will likely further integration between anyone in the world. I mean, it is very, very easy to learn. It is cutting off the resources from anyone in the world. For example, someone from China and someone from Brazil could easily communicate and further the relations better using Babel without the drain of so many resources. We think that this is beneficial to further integration and unification between and break down all the barriers between trade, between interaction, etc., between all the world's peoples and countries. So how this will happen? Everyday communication will be used in Babel, and this further promotes more understanding. And I think that there might be differences of perception and accents and etc., but I think that it will still be an easily accessible and equitable language for all. The second purpose of language is culture. People use language to preserve the traditions, which are uniquely central, and I think that it should not be brought into everyday use, because then it will shift all the important meaning that are pertaining inside the specific language. For example, take the example of Hebrew. Hebrew is the liturgical language of Judaism, which was used in the Torah, but it has been used in everyday communication between Israelis. So eventually, the important mechanics within Hebrew that is central to the Jewish culture becomes diluted and further lost in everyday communication between Jewish people. Yes?
If your purpose is unification, we have English.
Yeah, but the problem with English is partial to the major world power in the world, which is the United States, which is the West, which is NATO. Not everyone is willing to accept English. Not everyone is willing to use their resources, their whole country, their whole money and everything to learn English. And you have to also consider the interests of other countries and other dominant languages, such as China with Mandarin and Russia with Russian, which is not comparable to the proposal we have using Babel. What will happen in our world then? Two primary things. The first is the exchange of ideas. It is likely because language is a common factor, unifying exchange of ideas and other social aspects following it, such as law, books, trade, and scientific research papers and everything. We think that this is a good thing because it interconnects the world. What it will result in is a world that is stable, world stability. Stability doesn't mean peace, panels. We understand that world peace is a very, very utopian ideal. But stability is a check and balance. It means check and balance in conflicts between nations in the world, which is happening currently, which is happening because people do not necessarily understand the context of each other. For example, have you heard of Americans complaining about Gadjah oil in China? It is not actually Gadjah oil, but something that the Chinese use and has their own idiom, and then it is used to mock the Chinese and etc. So we think with reducing this barrier of communication, what it will result is not completely world peace, but a system of checks and balances that allow people to integrate their communication better to filter out any conflict. Of course, this is our best case. What is our worst case is that people will use Babel to attack each other, but I think that this is still fine. Everyone uses Babel, all the 7 billion people in the earth. So through all the density of communication and etc., I think that people will ultimately develop a system of filterization that is possible because they want to understand each other, right? Which is not possible when you have half the world speaking English opposed to half the world speaking Chinese. The second thing is cultural exchange. I think that the common norms and practicalities of one continuing to the other so that people can have a better understanding of each other's practices. It means that it furthers my thesis about checks and balances in society. A lot of concerns about the loss of culture is exaggerated because exactly culture constantly changes. Link back to my example about Hebrew. A lot of cultural practice between the Jewish people, such as the Ashkenazi community of Jews in Europe, are lost because people use the historic Hebrew language and that supersedes the traditional practices. So the traditional practices have become lost anyway because culture constantly changes. If these languages are relegated to a specific use, such as liturgical, such as something that is very, very respected and not being used in everyday language, I think the preservation of culture and understanding can be done better in our world. For all those reasons, proposing Babel. Thank you.
Thank you for the speech. Now we call upon the first speaker from opening opposition.
Check. Every language represents your facets of uniqueness, our ability to use it, not just to communicate, but also for cultures, for poems and songs. English has Shakespeare, Arabic have Khalil Gibran. It is so important back when Sumpah Pemuda, where we added there must be one language too, other than the unity of the people. This uniqueness and agency is what makes us human. It what makes us unique to other species, and this we must defend for the sake of this pluralism. One point of clarification for the opening government. Yes, it will be implemented, but the language in and of itself does not come from human. The burden of this debate is to adopt, not to implement. Therefore, the government's burden is to defend the process of adopting as much as the impact in of itself. So we say that adopting process is simply not worth it for the sake of the marginal benefit that you are going to get under the government bench. Firstly, why is it not urgent? And this is directly engaging to OO. How do we use language? I know PM already explained this, but I think there are two things that you need to emphasize. Firstly, to we gain it by familiarizing ourselves through our surroundings. That's why babies can learn any languages in basically any languages, right? Secondly, we adapt with our surroundings. That's why, for example, when I interact with Rona all the time, I say Kak when I'm surprised. This means that there is a necessity to communicate, but it only extends insofar with the people in your surroundings, which are united by the similar mother tongue. There is no need for universal language imposed upon us, because if you can access global discourses, then you're already able to access studying the lingua franca, such as French or English. Hence, insofar as most of your communication, vast majority of it, will be concentrated within your surroundings, there is no urgency to enforce every humans to a universal language. But secondly, no matter how easy it is still a foreign language. You have to learn it, and sure, it is easier comparatively. For example, if you need 1 year to learn Dutch, for example, as an Indonesian, but you need 6 months only with Babel language. But you still have to learn it, and it is easier for you to speak with local languages. A, because you're already accustomed by it, because originally you already accustomed by the people surrounding you. And secondly, language also affects the human evolution, how you biologically speak. This is why vast majority of Spanish people are non-rhotic, because they cannot spell their S, or like English people do not spell their R. This is something that is essential and do not get accounted by the government bench to begin with, right? But thirdly, if you are learning a new language, you are most likely afraid to use it at the start, right? You are most likely going to be scared of saying, like greeting people in a new language, because you already get accustomed to it, unless there is a specific need for you to do it, and the specific need is not really that massive, exactly because you only interact most likely with the people surrounding you. So the delta is simple. While it is easier to learn with any other language compared to other languages, for example, it takes 1 year to learn Dutch, it takes 6 months to learn Babel, you can learn your local language in weeks in comparative. So ultimately, the conclusion is A, there is no necessity for you to implement this global language exactly because of your scope of interaction. But secondly, in as much as it is easy, it is still going to be a hassle in short term, and it is going to be not necessary for you to do that. But second contribution, and most importantly of them all, the cultural value. Language represents your culture and identity. It represents who you are as a person. It reflects your humanity and your uniqueness. Japanese language, for example, have 3 different levels of politeness, exactly because it reflects how politeness is highly valued by the Japanese culture. So does learning for other foreign language. It represents your willingness to take part in global discourse. I learned English in my high school years to study for debate, because I want to know what happened in the world and whatnot. This is important. Learning different foreign languages provided you with distinct advantage that no other people can, no normal access, and most likely, exactly because you are empowered by it, you are most likely reflecting your agency and are willing to actually contribute to the global discourses. However, this agency and culture will be taken away under the government bench. Before I move on, it's already 5. Any points? No? All right. So, however, this agency and culture is taken away under the government bench, because on balance, people take pride in their local languages. The local value, for example, reflects how their language, for example, through their local stories, is bestowed by their God, so that they must cherish it, they must value it, they must protect it from other intervention. Which means, insofar as you are planning to adopt a global language, something that is foreign to most people, it will face a lot of resistance and a lot of backlash in status quo. Meaning that the process is going to be long and taking a lot of significant offense to begin with. This is bad because it will offend the human community that exists in the status at the beginning to begin with, because exactly local culture, the culture itself represented by the language. But in the long term, it will be the loss of human uniqueness. You will lose the human value that your local language afforded to begin with. The uniqueness will be stripped away. You are not able to appreciate the differences of culture in time. The spirit of pluralism and exchange will be gone because language shapes your culture. You can never see English gamelan song because English is unsuitable for it. The same reason why you will never see the Indonesian version of to be or not to be. If everyone have the same culture, it will create dullness and the excitement of being human. Humans will be no different than robots communicating in universal codes of one and zeros and binaries. The weighing is simple. Stability, there is no stability under government. What makes us human is far more important than any benefit that they provide. Oppose.
Thank you for that speech. Now to extend the case from opening government, we call upon the DPM.
Yes. Would start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Tiang aturang bakti aja sayang yang widi puniki. Don't you think it's hard to understand my language or even to inform my gratitude is already hard? Means there's an inherent need of universal language. Is there? Since there's no alternative available universal language, I would explain why is it true in the letters. But rebuttals to the OO. I think first, the sentiment emphasis of human-created language doesn't hold because language are evolved and imposed by other human groups through time. English itself is 60% from French. Indigenous Americans forced to learn Spanish. Hebrew has its words constructed from Arabic. Cultures evolve, and if you want to keep your culture intact in the form of based interaction, use Babel. Second, interaction glorified by OO is false flag because you are forced to interact in spaces partial to people you're not necessarily in support of. E.g., Chinese forced to interact in American forums. That's why China might met on their own social media because it's just so hard to convert language. But thirdly, I don't think community finances, culture vanishes without specific language. Indonesian still majority Muslim without Arab language and use Indonesian language. Balinese doesn't abandon Hindu when use Indonesian language. It's eventually become Balinese respect Hindu, and it is not contingent upon the language. There is false. But per se, language is there to connect people. It makes people know each other through coordinated at people basis. But before to the principle, we are going to the practicality itself. I think in regard of this practicality of one language are so good because A, it boosts a cultural exchange. Clashing their OO. It makes it easier to tell your thought when entered a situation of explanatory to hinterland people, for example. For those who are unable to speak because of their language handicap, speaking capability is a handicap, i.e. those who in Congo who doesn't speak up English and can raise their voice in excessive cobalt mining and need to wait for American journalists to realize to be able for them to speak up on their social media at the current status quo. So much that it's also distort information in language conversion that blurted out the trueness of information. In informing things in your everyday life, Makassar language use kita as you. In Bahasa Indonesia, kita means we. Meaning there is an inherent difference of information that could lead into wrong
things in processing information, but in principality extending my PM. At basis, language run on one main reason, and this is why language exists in our world, to inform others about information, to keep others things survive, and to keep your people survive. Language is born under age of Neolithicum to inform other cavemen when they were going to hunt, or what strategy they are willing to use in hunting. That's why when you see an ancient cave, for example, you're gonna see a carving of hunting culture under it, and also ancient language, meaning in and on itself, the language is it's there to be communicated and to be easy to learn for people to communicate and inform what the other thought are, and means that regardless of the culture point, even if it is true to the principality of why language exists, informatability and easy to use is the most main metric. This falls exclusive under Babel, where it has no different meaning in different intonation, like Chinese pinyin, for example, or even French with the unger or even pronoun, or English with past, present, future tense. This was nothing like it is so simple that we can comprehend. This also close the CG cases if they want to extend about process, because assuming this was from alien, assuming that the world in the motion itself universally adopt, it means that the implementation happened in top to bottom distribution, where you held a conference like PBB does, first to gather countries bilingual speaker or even professional speaker writer, for example, to learn this common language, this easier language, because it's easy to process and going to happen exponentially under, for example, 100 people to 200 people, and basically trickling down to those in bottom. Because then the comparative is nothing like English where you have to go with present, past, future. This language exactly is really easy to learn without no limitation of pronunciation, not like French. When you want to speak, you have to have that accent of girl, or Japan, who hard to adapt to English because they cannot stop in non-vocal word like Nataru or even Mekidi, for example. Meaning at the end of the day, the main point are it's easy to learn and the process is there. And because that in this motion that this language is universally accepted by the universe or even by the world, a question of whether or not the world would, you as an individual would be afraid to speak it because it's a language from alien would not be there, since you are already accepting it in the very first place, because the universal regarding in motion means universally adopt Babel, means since the very first place, the fiat of government is to assume that, okay, I'm not afraid of this language as an everyday language. But let's say they worry about culture, right? Let's see the contextualization. But before that,
level of difficulties in language is subjective. So why then sacrificing the philosophy behind the language has to be prioritized over easiness?
Because why language born is to inform everyone about what's your thought, into exchange of culture, into their safety, where minors in Congo cannot speak up because they don't use English past, present, future tense. That's why. Okay, moving on. Why then, in the language of mankind, is not gonna disturb a culture like that much that the OO trying to impose onto this debate? I think the motion already told you as an everyday language, which mean in a formal conference, I think a culture boosted still held their own bahasa daerah, for example, like how in Malaysia, in everyday language, you mostly use Chinese, but in formal conference, they still use for example, like Melayu, for example. I don't think the culture gonna be vanished, because then there is also a coexist pushes for government to still intact what their local language are. But the difference is it's more easier for now for people to talk in their everyday life, to think, to communicate their thought, to support the spread of information. So that's why the comparative are, the culture is not going to lose that much by my justification of, culture doesn't contingent on language, but also there is a push for intacting local language, for example, informal conference, not everyday life. So that's why in the benefit of informing, we still there, and the benefit of culture is not going to be that bad. And in the last thing is, means first we explain practical benefit of Babel, we also present principal value of language of why they are born, and we defend our culture CG cannot extend. Thank you.
Thank you for the speech. Now, to close the case from opening opposition, we call upon the LO.
Hello. Check-in, is this loud enough? Okay. Um, Before starting my speech, since this topic is once more quite sensitive, it's related to language and anything. Probably everything that I said during the speech is not for the sake of the debate. It's just for the sake of. It's not for the sake of representing my personal views. Just for the sake of debate. Okay. I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. This is a type of motions that encourage everyone to use their imaginations, which I think opening government failed miserably. Because opening government analysis predicated on one simple premise, which is it is easier for us to communicate with this language. But at no point they explain and engage with JSON analysis, which is very important because people do not really know where the source of that language are. And if people do not really know where the source of that language are, people are likely to be scared and skeptical, in contrast to learning that language in the first place, which is their burden to defend the process of adoptions. The reasons why we want to use English in debating community, because we witness someone like Boseo, someone that we really know from YouTube videos or anything, because that's proximate to us. So therefore, in the side of the house, there are a lot of possibilities. Some people will think this is just a code, this is just a spell mantra, this is just a secret information. Although this is easy to be learned, but this make people think that there were precautions and we must avoid this in the first place. So therefore, the prerequisite of their case to run is people must have the urgency first to learn, which is they didn't really prove why they have the urgency to do so. But second of all, even if that is not true, I'll flip this case entirely by claiming that miscommunications is happened for intents on opening government. Reasons why, even Oxford Dictionary right now does not contain perfect amounts of words in every language, in every English language, right? That's why usually the sources of you learn some kind of language, including Babel, are also limited. Opening government once more also does not explain the process of bestowing this. The only analysis that we got from their side is that, oh yeah, somehow God will just give ancient scriptures to you, which I don't really know how much coverage the ancient scriptures will give in the first place. What this means is that the motions once more does not state whether the beings can travel to another dimension to cover and expand the words in the first place. So therefore, although it is easier to learn, but the Bible still have limited words because they do not really have enough sources such as scriptures that you can learn or everyday interactions from the aliens on gods that you can directly observe and learn that situations. So therefore, you don't really have enough words to describe something. You probably cannot find things such as Loki in Indonesian, and so does Loki in Bible. What this means is that if anything, miscommunications is happening more intense in their side because they got limited sources, and I don't think we can possibly find the aliens or gods who actually created this language. The third thing is to say that the communications is all better in opening oppositions, because we explained that in status quo there has been established systems that better and had more sources to develop infinitely, such as English that could probably interact with other language, or there are existing apps such as Duolingo or Google Translate, which you can learn, which is coming from far more accurate sources, and the sources can develop infinitely. Therefore, because we can took historical sources of language or anything, so you have better opportunity to learn, no matter how it is easier to learn on their side of the house. If the vocabulary are derived from limited sources, then the possibility of you having the better communication does not exist. The second thing that I want to respond is to say that opening government said you have urgency to learn to communicate with other people. Number one, assuming this is true, but it's only limited for some privileged individuals who probably becoming someone like us, who interact in debating and communicating with other people from other nations. The problem is, somehow, a lot of individuals still had physical barrier or limited opportunities, such as you can only interact with people from France, from scholarship or exchange, or if you had a girlfriend coming from there. So therefore, you're likely to interact So therefore, the likely interactions that you form in day-to-day basis is not going to be international community friendship, but rather the people closer to you, your grandma, your grandpa, your pop, your mom. So therefore, it's very important for you to understand Japanese better because this is your daily language. This is the language that you will use to communicate with the people that are going to communicate with you the most. Therefore, opening government does not really explain why most people will interact with diverse communities to the points you need to adopt this to become everyday language. That's a burden that closing government must answer. The second thing is to say that interact with other people is not all about exchanging words, right? It's all about building sympathetical and emotional feelings. Because whenever I understand Japanese, I do not really understand the words behind it, but I also understand the cultural meaning behind it. For instance, if people wanted to learn Japanese, you learn Mongo as excuse me, it's not stopped there, but it's about respecting the elders. It's all about adopting these body gestures. So in order for you to build the understanding from other communities, in opening government, you cannot make the language as easier to be learned. Because in order for you to build sympathy and or like empathy to unite community or to interact frequently, you need to ensure that language are very difficult in order for you to ensure that the community, such as the people in Japanese, understand how effortful you are in learning this community that touch their emotional feelings. So therefore, these are what prevents the miscommunications and unity that happen in our side of the house. Unity is not only about exchanging empty words, it's about understanding other values, which about culture, because the culture is the closest part of the consciousness that human being possess. Therefore, we should adhere to the softest points of humans to ensure that unity does exist. The last thing that opening government said is that it's basically shift how the culture works in general. Number one, I do not really know whether the shift would be good or not because there is no picturizations given on their side of the house. But even if they explain this, if they wanted to put this in Babel as the priority, you will be the main public enemy from every communities, right? Because you do not really know where this language came from. You do not really know who owned this language, but suddenly you're gonna say to everyone that, hey guys, this language is far more superior than other. This is offensive for people in France. This is offensive for people in England. So what does this mean is that you are likely to become enemies of publics, and you are unlikely to get the people consent on their side of the house. Because in order for you to force these people to learn, you need to ensure that there is a significant superiority that you promote in that language that probably overweigh other language, which is not going to be the case because people are attached to this identity for far too long. They consider this as a part of themselves because they grow with this, they interact with the people closer to them with this language, and etc. So therefore, which is really important, by the way. So now language goes beyond communications. It contains every single interaction since the first era of civilizations. What happened in opening government is that when they put communications only as the matter of interactions, they deny the histories of human interactions, step on it, thinking that human and emotional interactions are quite unnecessary. This is important in our side of the house because we consider this as something valuable and something closer to human being. Last thing, OG said that it's harder to adapt the language, but sure, in other sources, in their side of the house, they do not really explain how will you expand the vocabulary of the language. Are you going to go to dimensional portal, which costs more resources, or do space journey, which is quite uncertain anyway, rather than 50K per month for you to develop Super Duolingo, which is far more accessible in our side of the house. So if the case from opening government is to say that it's very hard for you to learn the new language, it is better in our side of the house because you had the prior sources, and even if you have more resources to do so, it's better for you to develop this first more than anything. Post.
Thank you for the speech. Now to open the case from closing government, we call upon member of Gov.
Halo, aman ya? In this host prefer motion, you need to prove whether the comparative is more preferable. This is why the burden of the opposition bans not talking that, oh, it will less intention for individual to learn this language or how it's something that's very hard for you because you fear or something similar, but explaining also the comparative, why then the existence of English language as a universal right now is something that enough and beneficially for individual. Those explanation is losing in the both opening bans. This is why they lose. Several response into the OO. Three things. A, they say that the intention of individual will less likely because they will afraid or something similar along those lines, no intention. But if it's the case, I think those problem or harm will significantly happen also in their side of this house because those people are never know where the English will come from, when and who built those kind of things at the very beginning with of at the end of the day. The intention of individual to learn is still less likely, more likely because of there's tons of barrier that access, like it will have been capitalized by individual. This is why it's not accessible for individual to opt in or something similar along those lines. This is why the harm will still manifested exclusively. But if we're talking about the culture, I think there is no any explanation given by OO why then the culture is something that more beneficial. But if it's yes, it's something because we say the threat of losing the culture is something totally okay the time when you have more inherent integration of individual that can benefiting every single existence that exists. But even if it yes, losing culture is something significant, we say something totally okay to do because losing the cultural differences is the only way for you to minimize tons of conflict that happened in the past. For example, the first one between Muslim and Romawi happened because there is mistranslation between the surah that they've been sending, for example, that triggered more harm. We say the time when those adaptation has happened in the selfish house, those kind of problem talking about conflict because of misinterpretation will never happen at the end of the day. We can save tons of individual life. We say something that very significantly happen. Lastly, talking about the scope of interaction. I will just bite the bullet. If the scope of interaction is small, I will say no because of the actions of globalization, for example, huge mobilization of individual. You need the capacity to adapt and have capacity to interaction, for example. This is why it's important. But if it's no, at least in the small scale of individual, you can understand what ingredient you watch the time when you eat Oreo, for example. This is why it's something very important to know. It is haram or halal, for example. The time when this language is not accessed, I think the capacity to understand those kind of things will limited to one that elitist at the very begin with. I don't see why the one war low middle ground vulnerable can access those kind of things. OG losing because two things. A, they were never losing about they were not explain us why then those English is enough at the end of the day. But second, the process of adaptation how would look like. This is why they lose. This is how CG will open by explain to you how the process of adaptation and why then this is the only way for you to protect the most vulnerable actor that exists. Let's jump to the first one. Let's jump to the first one. How the comparative of universal language will disadvantage the vulnerable actor. This is some context that could be a consensus that those Babel is something that are easier to be understand. It's necessary for you to put more effort, relatively easier for you to learn compared to another language. It could be a consensus. But why this disadvantaged community have been losing the benefit in status quo? Because the current language like English are relatively hard to be understand. This is why it has been capitalized by tons of elites. It's somehow providing for you to exits into the bimbel. There's for example expensive, for example. It's very hard to you to opt in into IELTS because of its spend for million that I don't see why then all those individual will have the capacity to afford. How it's manifest? Two things. This how most likely the one who can study abroad and get scholarship for the government is just elitists who have tons of money at the very begin with. Less likely for individual who stay under middle ground or vulnerable can afford those kind of things. But second, limited the capacity of individual to mobilize and gain job, for example. This is what happened in Indonesia when tons of unemployment happen, but you can't mobilize to other place that are provide you more employment like Korea or something similar because you don't have the capacity to opt in those kind of things. This is very significant. Two things. A, the one who firstly impacted by the progressivity is only the elitists that I don't see something that is inherently beneficial. We say in comparative, we can diverse the beneficiary. We say something that very important to do so. But I will prove to you the comparative why then accessibility will happen before move on. Apa nih?
So our case is not about learning every single language that exists in this world. Our case is all about having agency for people to choose their own daily language that is closest to them the most.
I think if we are talking about local language, it will be exist anyway. It's not the problem, but the way is how you can adopt it. The time when you have interaction in daily, for example, adoption, it doesn't mean you erase everything because there is that. It's never at the very beginning with this has prefer motions. What is the comparative? How the adoption would look like? I think it's not talking like Jose told, oh, it's given by God or something similar. I think those language is already there. It's suddenly there. For example, this is what happened with English or Indonesian, that you never know where and when it operates. For example, you can just learn it. For example, we say if the case is about fear, those incentive structure will exist because you have more intention and benefit from those kind of things. This is what happened when individuals learn about crypto, even though they understand there is tons of risk that you to opt-in. But where it's beneficial? Because the comparative is a way it's more accessible. Because it intentionally easier to understand means that access for you to learn and afford it will high likely. For example, you can learn it by autodidact, you can learn it by YouTube or something similar along those lines. But what does it translate? It translates into a significantly increasing capacity for individual that not only discriminates only individual who are elitist, but also individual who can opt in the bimbel or something similar. You still have the capacity to gaining scholarship for the government or mobilize into some certain things to gaining more job, there are more welfare or something. We say the prerequisite of you is have the capacity to opt in those language. How are weighing? Two things. In the protection of the vulnerability, only CG will opt in and explain to you the significance of benefit, because those vulnerable are the one who are significantly impacted with the current insufficient universal language that exists like English. But second, we can significantly give you a clear picturization compared to OG that very unclear at the very beginning with why the interaction is important and who will be impacted. Those analysis only upon the CG explanation. Very proud.
Thank you for the speech. Now to open the case from closing opposition, we call upon the first speaker from CO.
Hello. Audible? Just a disclaimer, especially it's recorded, talking about issues of minority probably and local languages and whatnot. This does not represent my own personal view. I will start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. CO will prove to you to win this debate why local language are essential to identity, also mechanizing all of the OO's case. Not that we are going to engage that in process it's problematic. We're going to take all of the best cases from government. Why if Babel is effective, it's going to be bad. We are going to tell you in CO. We're very simple because we think local languages are the prerequisite to communal solidarity and a support system that you inherently need in your proximity. Let's kick out both government bench before going into my contribution to win this debate, right? I think if they want to take a burden of unity, cooperation, and to prevent alienation or integration of minorities and whatnot, I think first there is no likelihood that it's clear why is exactly this is because of language. I think there are some few efforts from CG, but I will engage to this, right? We say it's impossible in both worlds because it's not because of language. It's because of the lack of cooperation stems from different political will of each leaders. It's the structural government failures. It's the different moral values from each proximity. That's why war happens. That's why minorities get segregation, not because they speak differently, but because of all of these externalities. It's inherently not changeable, even if we change the way that they speak. I think that's not the case, right? I think if you want to try to limit, try to minimize this harm, I think our comparative is simple. If you want to handle all of the big issues of wars or proximity of conflicts between countries, then you don't need to adopt it every day because you're going to dilute all of your local languages and people will forget about their identity. But on our comparative, you're just going to adopt Babel for very specific diplomatic purposes for a country, for example. If you are so scared of English, of their languages, or how history, let's just adopt it for just diplomatic purposes, not every day, because every day we are in comparison in CO, we are going to prefer a world where everyday usage of a language are using their most proximate and local language, and that's why it's very important. I want to first clearly portray why languages are the prerequisite to identity. I want to clearly portray how languages are the backbone of identity, right? Because in each localities, there are different ways to describe different phenomenons, because it is a medium of depicting shared grievances of the past. This is why Makassar language that I identify as is loud and sharp, because the grievances of mass internal conflict makes us very angry. Or in comparative, very far, Japanese are very smooth and soft. It's because they love harmonization between communities. Exactly, it is a sign of consensus to communicate. It is a sign of cooperation of each localities by bunch of individuals. It is organically built by communities in each locality. This is why exactly in each localities they have different languages, as they face different struggles. Exactly, that stems your identity and that manifests into a language. Exactly, all of this analysis proof, right? That the languages that you speak, it is the backbone of cultures. It is the identity of each localities, and it manifests through languages. It is the distinction of relations by all human beings. It is the difference of why I'm a Makassar person. I'm different towards people who are in Java because I have different shared grievances, and it is shown the way I speak because all of the shared grievances. Why then this is important to be used every day? Two analysis, very simple. Firstly, because the way that you are going to use local languages every day, because it is a form to remind you of the culture. This analysis is better than OO, because the moment you always use this on everyday local languages, it is to remember your local community. When I talk in Makassar to my friends in Zara and Nail, it makes me remember where I came from. It makes me remember my family in Makassar, that you have people who sparks and supports for your life. That's the prerequisite of analysis, because languages are the everyday reminder of where you come from. It carries the history with it. This is better analysis than OO, because OO talks to you, how it will going to be encourage you to learn about the culture, but with no analysis. But when you use a local language every day, it sparks discourses. It looks like your father tells you why people in Makassar talk so sharply and loudly. It's because of something. It's because of the curiosity that exists. The moment you're always going to use it every day, that's the prerequisite analysis. But the second analysis that is important to use every day, because the daily usage enforces the shared identity that you have. The daily reminder from day-to-day conversation, the jokes that you totally understood virtually, not comparatively towards other people, because specifically in your localities you have different languages. This makes it special. This makes that you have special connection to your Makassar family, to your Makassar friends, compared to your Japanese friends, because they don't have because they have different grievances shown by the way that they are talking about. In comparative, you all remove that. There is no specific description. There is no specific distinction of all people in this room, and their localities are all going to be forgotten because they don't understand, and they don't try to remember their culture, because they completely every day are going to use Babel and forget it. Then why is this important to protect the existence of this identity and a force of reminder every day, right? Two analysis. Firstly, because it enforces solidarity. It is the way that people create safe spaces to not feel alone when you are somewhere that you feel alienated, that you don't have anyone proximate that knows you. But the moment that you're going to talk about in Makassar every day, and then people understand you, you feel that solidarity. You feel that you have people with the shared grievances. You feel that the people that faces the same seniority I had in Makassar. That is in the very worst case, right? At least on our side, we create solidarity in very small localities, especially that is very important because you face so many issues. But before that, opening.
Local language for communal belongings create communal segregation because you defend your community of one local language, take pride in it against other.
Again, it's not local languages. It's the different political will. It's the different of moral values that you hold. Exactly, you don't engage with other local communities. It's not languages. Okay, going to second analysis why it is important to protect, right? Because it is the prerequisite for communal support. The moment that you know I speak Makassar, the people that knows that I come from Makassar, knows the same grievances that I have, then they are incentivized to know how to interact with me, what makes me sensitive, what triggers me. Exactly, this is very important because it's the backbone of your identity. My last analysis is very important. Why is this all exclusive for local languages? Because the way people look like, the way people behave, the way people do debate speeches are all approximately different and varies between people even if they are from the same locality. But it is the language that they speak every day that gives you a clear identification that they came from your community, that they came from your same community that faces the same grievances, that share identity that is the prerequisite for communal support and solidarity. It is very the most important because all of the issues on government will not exist anyway. Very proud to win.
Thank you for the speech. Now to conclude the case from Gov Batch, we call upon Government Whip.
Last night, Ilham told me that we will not achieving the semi-finalists of NUDC because both of us came from Indonesian background. We came from LDBI and KDMI. This is the one who This is the reason why English language that exists in the status quo is highly discriminative because the barrier of entry that exists in the current world is so high for individual to opting in. Most of vulnerable actor like me and Ilhan that come from Bogor and Pekalongan cannot opt in to those kind of discourses because IELTS and maybe I have to go to Bina Insani, for example, to learn the new language. At the end of the day, it's so expensive since the very first place. They never actually touch this. Why? Why those kind of comparative is better under their side. To point out the entire case from opposition and opening government. First of all, opening government first. I think the differences between OG and CG is very clear. We mechanize how this house prefers motion looks like. It's because it's not like alien will suddenly come next, for example, but it's because it is in the society. We prefer a two different society that coexisting with each other. We fulfill the burden. None of the case fulfill that because their case is retrospective, not retroactive, judges. This is the important case and important framing in the closing government. But second of all, why opposition lose in this debate? Not because the substantive, it's because they have no comparative in this house prefers motion. Means that they have to fulfill first why the English language is very important. CG upper hand, then other three themes in this debate. Two clashes that exist in this debate. First of all, the urgency to adopt, like what the clashes in opening. Second of all, about culture also in opening and closing opposition. First of all, urgency to adopt the language. I think for my opening line, it is very clear that we have the urgency to adopt the new language since the very first place. Because English is very problematic to be a universal language. Two reasons why. First, it has the past colonial history that exists in the status quo. Most of the countries that exist in the status quo have been colonized by Western country, for example, and etc. Secondly, it's highly elitist. This is the reason why IELTS is 6 million rupiah, for example. It's been capitalized by the society since the very first place. Meaning that in the moment of adaptation that coming from up, what will happen that you will not only go and give your own resources since the very first place, but you have to rewind the trauma that exists because of our culture and whatsoever. But you also have to comprehend the trauma that exists behind the past of this foreign language. This is also the reason as to why Indonesia never adopt Dutch, for example, because we are traumatic with those kind of past colonial history. But second of all, there are judgment towards people that cannot speak English fluently, for example. This is also the reason why it is very problematic since the very first place. And why this is very harmful? Exactly, because in the status quo, the one who can access the English language is the one who privileged. So the standard is mitigating their standards since the very first place. This is very problematic since the very get-go. I will engage to the Deputy Leader of Opposition arguments about agency. Judges, we have no agency to choose our language since the very first place. We are born to speak Indonesian, for example. We have no agency at all. The differences is, in our side, if you have different background, different societal status, different economical condition, you have one thing that you can access with. What it is? The language of Babel that unite the person. This is most urgent, their case and comparative to opening government case, because the prerequisite of all integration and whatsoever, it's lie on what? The just parameter to comprehend all the differences that we have in the status quo. Agency out in this debate. Even if the agency is the tipping point, we prove to you why agency is better under closing government side of the house. But second clashes then about cultural uniqueness and a human value that exists through culture, for example, for centuries. First of all, I will rewind this to you. This house prefer a world motion. Means that you have to compare two different worlds that exist in the status quo. What will happen under our side is, first of all, this kind of language will be internalized to you since you are children, for example. Meaning that this will be motivated when you are children, for example. Meaning that everyone will have same starting point to option since the very first place into this kind of Babel language later on. But second of all, everyone will most likely have the same capacity to understand because those family is also internalizing to you since the very first place. This means that in comparative to their side, will English and a lingua franca thingy, maybe my father doesn't know English language, but in our side, my father knows the Babel language. This is the reason why the adaptation process will be easier under our side of the house. Yes, before that, closing government.
So in
closing opposition.
So according to manual, the burden that opposition needs to define in prefer motion is a status quo. In status quo, we had different language. If you think like that's traumatized, you choose the one closest to you, Indonesian or Japanese.
But all your benefit about integration and whatsoever will meanings that they are not engaging with our case about integration, judges. This is the reason why closing government wins this debate, because they never actually engage to the point that government side of the house bring to the table. But second of all, the process of institution that internalize for you through institution that close to you, family, school, society, that close to people, exactly because they really universally adapted, meaning that this will become extremely accessible for every single people in the society. People cannot capitalize it because every single people knows it. For example, this is the reason why the process of adaptation will be much easier under our side of the house, and just for example, but comparatively worse under their side of the house because their capacity is different, for example, and this is capitalized by those kind of ELs, for example, and whatsoever. This is the reason why those kind of things is not existent. The corporation that they want to champion is not existent because the process is never actually explained by both government side of the house. But let's engage first about the adaptability of language, because government side is say that, oh yeah, this will hamper cultural adaptability and whatsoever. This is very important because exactly this language is adaptive, meaning that there is incentive for people to translate the meaning of their language to those kind of things in the status quo. In both sides, the language will not existent, but in the process of you opting it to Babel, exactly because your rural area from Purwokerto, for example, you can translate the meaning easily under our side house in comparative to the English language or whatsoever under their side. But about the adaptability and language, like vocabulary, for example, I think we are not debating in a vacuum. Means that every single interaction that exists with the Babel language will make Babel language develop since the very first place. We are winning all the metrics to win this debate. Very proud to propose.
Thank you for that speech. Now to wrap the debate, we call upon the opposition whip.
Am I heard? Okay. Thank you. So sorry for taking so long. Disclaimer: I'll be talking about minorities since I'm also minorities myself. So yeah. Okay. I start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. When I first goes to UNER, I'm from Medan, by the way. I'm scared that no one understands me because I am from Medan myself. It's so far, by the way. But the moment when I find my Medan friends, I feel relate to her. I feel like I'm not alone. I feel like I'm not alone at the end. In all benches, those fears might happen. Those differences in cultures might happen. But what happens in this debate is that who can prove the protections of those culture? How can you protect the minorities at the end? I think both of government benches or even UGM fails to answer that. CO step in by saying that diversity of languages is the identity is an identity to identify who you actually are, where you actually from. If I say apa lah kau, so sorry, people will automatically know that I'm from Sumatra, I'm from Medan, for example. Therefore, it's easier for people to identify fellow Sumatrans, for example. In case when you're in small communities, for example, at the end, right? But responses to closing government, then I think there are 3 responses. Some of these responses also engage to opening government, right? Because I think they're they share the similarities in terms of purposes in approaching this case, right? Firstly, closing government, I think they argues a lot in terms of elitism of language, right? I'll not engage a lot in terms of accessibility because I think Brian has responded beautifully how the accessibilities exist on Duolingo and so on and so forth. But if they want to say about the capacity to understand your choices based on the culture, because Kak Ilham mentions about haram and halal is non-understandable to non-Muslims and so on and so forth. This entails that closing government agrees that they want to eradicate the concept in original language. This equals to you also eradicate the culture inside them, right? In closing government, the concept of halal and haram that is so proximate to Muslim will not be pushed. You will not make people understand you. Instead, you give the signals for those Muslims that your culture is not that important and so on and so forth. Therefore, you have to generalize. You have to blend with other people that you are the same. Anyways, right? Exactly, we tell you that these people already struggle to access to external factors regularly. You worsen the situation to not try to understand the beauty of the diversity and so on and so forth. Therefore, when they tell you that diversity still exists on their side of the house in terms of language, I do not really understand how they protect it at the end, right? I think all benches agree that diversity of cultural differences exists, right? But on your side of the house, you do not really protect minority exactly, but you worsen the situation because we say that in terms of diversity, there is still existence besides languages like skin color and so on and so forth. The question is that how did exactly you can enforce this community to bond if not by language and so on and so forth, right? Second, how we protect the minority, but before then, closing.
How you protect the minority if minority have to opt into English language that very elitist since the very first place your comparative is worse?
English is a professional language. You can use it for professionalism only. So I do not really understand how then this language is so elitist. But even if it's elitist, it's not the problems anyways because you have so much alternatives, right? Second, how we protect the minorities is to give them the authenticity. Is to give them the authenticity that they have their own languages that also sticks to the accents followed by the languages, right? Because that is the only thing that they have. That is the special values that they have in minorities, right? Therefore, how do you create a special bond in terms of these languages that is exclusive comparing to a government batch, right? Yeah, we tell you. We tell you in terms of exclusivities for this creating special bonds is that the way you behave, the way you interact with people are very various, right? The moment when you say a certain imbuhan, for example, in a language, people will automatically know that who you are actually, where you're actually from, that is proximate to you, right? This is important because language is a shared value, especially on the minorities where you're going somewhere, for example, where you're going to survive, and anywhere, for example, you're scared. Yeah, you're scared by initial trauma, for example, because of you. Yeah, you have the possibilities to be discriminated or even feeling alone and so on and so forth, right? But even if they might argue that this can also happen to us, we take the bullet, but on their side of the house, they also do not explain how did they solve this anyways. This is worse on their side of the house. We tell you that it is very bad to generalize the language, for example, because people in privilege versus people as minorities, this, for example, if they are entailed as the same, you give the message that they do not really have the value that you have to appreciate on due to different grievances and so on and so forth. This is exclusive that can only be obtained by local language at the end of the day, right? Lastly on adopting, I think I explained I think I already explained slightly anyways, but we say that the identity of you is very important, to identify that you are part of the communities. This is the prerequisite for you to share the solidarity and so on and so forth, and communal values even when you're outside, for example, right? Comparison to OO, I think it's quite hard burden for you to actually prove how that the process of changing is hard. We protect minorities.
Thank you for that speech, and that wraps up our semi-final round. Congratulations for everyone. So now everyone can leave this room and wait for the result, and best of luck, everyone.
Thank you, knowledge.